You are listening to Autistic Stuff for Autistic People, a podcast from the Autistic Peer Support Coaching Collective and Fox and Raven Media. I am Aradia. I am the creatively autistic coach and the podcast producer for Fox and Raven Media.
And I am Cheryl. I'm a peer support coach and body talk practitioner who works with other late identified autistic adults to better understand their needs, challenges, strengths, and unique wiring to live with more grace and compassion.
Welcome to this week's episode of Autistic Stuff for Autistic People, where we're introducing a new voice. A new member of the coaching cohort is coming to you, to your lovely ears, dear listeners. This is Dan. Welcome very much to the podcast. We're so happy to have you.
I'm very happy to have you.
Very happy to be here.
And so, we just want to kind of get you and the audience to get to know each other a little bit. So I sent you a couple of questions ahead of time, and you said you had a couple of prepared notes thought out about that. So we just kind of want to know who you are and kind of what your autism story is and what your approach to coaching is and why you're in the coaching collective with us.
Yeah, for sure. I, like many autistic folk, I imagine, can be long-winded. So that's part of my being prepped is like trying to
love our notes. Yes.
The tracks here. Yeah. So my name is Dan, though I also go by Daniel. I'm good with either, right? Dan, Daniel, whatever. My pronouns are he, they, similarly good with either. I am an openly trans, queer, ADHD, and disabled peer support coach, therapist, and gender doula in training. I live in Washington State, located on the unceded lands of the Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, and Calypso peoples. So that's just briefly kind of who I am.
Yeah, Pacific Northwest is best. I love it up here. I live on lands a little bit south of you, but it's lovely up here, isn't it? I know Cheryl's a bit farther east and north, but still, we're all in places that aren't too hot. So,
I'm very jealous whenever I hear you both talk about your beautiful, places that you live. I live in a urban city that's very flat and not quite so nature-based, but it just makes me go seek it out more.
Yeah, I am a transplant here. I'm originally from Houston, Texas, which is very flat, very urban sprawl. It wasn't until I lived in the Pacific Northwest during grad school, that was the first time I moved out of Texas, that I was like, oh, nature is the thing I want to be in. That's interesting. Because like in Texas, I hardly went outside. It's too hot.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. The last episode on this podcast was about being overheated and being too hot and dealing with that. And even me, I grew up here in the Pacific Northwest and I still have heat trauma despite that. I can't imagine growing up in Texas.
Yeah. No, because like even here, the days where it says like, you'll get the regular temperature and then you'll get the real feel, right? Because where I live, there's a lot of humidity. And so whenever it says real feel 40, which to translate for people who are not Canadian, that is like 100 plus. Whenever it goes there, I'm like, I think I'm going to stay inside today next to my fan.
Yeah.
So we know where you are literally in the world, Dan. Tell us a little bit about how you got here more metaphorically. Tell us a little bit about, how you discovered you were autistic and kind of like what brought you to the space right now.
It's going to be a journey as it is whenever we're asking someone what their autism story is.
100%.
Yeah. So I went to graduate school in Oregon to become a therapist around like 2016 to 2019. And my whole idea at the time, or like passion and motivation, was to become a therapist and specialize in providing care to queer and gender expansive community. Throughout the course of my grad school program, in hindsight, I think it's interesting that I don't remember the words autism or ADHD ever coming up or like being addressed at all. I never even heard the word neurodivergent in school. What's particularly upsetting to me, reflecting on that now, is the specific school and program that I went to really prides itself on like a social justice orientation. And so I feel like they absolutely could have been more on top of it when it came to the topic of neurodivergence. And so again, that word never came up. We never talked about autism or ADHD. And then the second I started working with clients, it was coming up constantly. Like I believe it was like the very first person I ever worked with used the word neurodivergent, and I had to ask them what that meant.
Here we go.
And that really opened a can of worms uh, for me at that point. So over time, I started to notice that the majority of clients who stayed on with me for long-term work, or where the connection and rapport seemed to happen more like fluidly and naturally, were all autistic and or ADHD. So on top of that, I related a lot to what people shared regarding things like sensory traits, meltdown, shutdowns, executive functioning difficulties, masking. So that's when the wheels really started turning in my mind. And I started to research autism and ADHD in order to, at that moment, better serve my clients. But I was also in the background, there was part of my brain that was like, just piecing some things together, but not in a way that I was ready to, I don't know, go deeper with, right? It was just like letting it simmer. And so I hit a deep burnout in 2020. This was like, I mean, I'm sure many of us did, but that was around the time I had deep burnout. It was like leading up to the quarantine phase of the COVID pandemic. I had been in Oregon, but I ended up moving back to my hometown in Texas so that I could live with a friend and be unemployed for a few months while I figured out what was going on with me. Honestly, I was just kind of dissociated and checked out for a number of months. Once I landed back in Texas and was like, okay, like I don't have to work, was just fully checked out. Like I couldn't even read, which is something historically I've always loved to do, being like, oh, look, I have all the time in the world right now to read. And I would open a book and it just, I wouldn't get anywhere. It'd stay on like the same page or the same sentence, even. So it was just kind of hanging out horizontal for a lot of that time. And eventually, the exhaustion and fog of burnout lifted enough that I could get back into my research on autism and ADHD. Of course, like the moment that I had more capacity, my mind was like, and we're revisiting this stuff. Given it was during that period of unemployment, I think that also allowed me to sit with it in a way that wasn't exclusively client focused and was like, okay, I've done that. And now I'm sitting with it and like really sitting in my own experience. So that's when I started to piece my self understanding back together, reflected on my history up until that point, and started to recognize all of my ADHD traits that had always been there. I got to a point where I felt so confident about it that I disclosed being autistic to my parents, fully expecting them to be surprised or like dismissive even about it. But they were so quickly like, yeah, for sure. And I was like, y'all are taking this so well that I have follow-up questions.
Yeah.
And so when I asked more about it, they revealed to me that I'd actually been tested multiple times in early childhood, like once a year from like pre-K to second grade. Every teacher I interacted with was like, hey, this kid doesn't speak, doesn't make eye contact, like this, I don't know what to do with
Mm.
your kid was basically the running theme.
Ah.
So I was too young to remember any of it, so I just really have to rely on my parents' memory to
Mhm.
figure that out.
Mhm.
Based on what they've told me, my understanding is that I wasn't necessarily formally evaluated for autism, but rather it was presented perhaps more as we think your kid is autistic or some vague something or another, and we recommend putting this kid in special education classes. So again, outside of like an evaluation that Texas public school was just like, let's just do that, thinking that every autistic kid is the same, needs the exact same supports. But anyway, so my mom being an elementary school teacher and having her own ideas about traditional neuronormative education versus special education and her own unpacked ableism was like, well, I feel like putting our kid in special education classes would mark them as deficient in some way,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Right,
So she fought
right.
really hard on that. So outside of getting a formal evaluation, it seems like the testing they did was just like standardized, like a standardized test to see if I was picking up on and retaining any of the class information and like education. Since I wouldn't speak or make eye contact with the teachers, they didn't know what I was picking up on or not, right? So it's like, okay, forgoing a formal evaluation, we're just gonna slap a standardized test on this kid. And if they pass it, then they're fine and they don't need any
Mhm.
supports. They're good to go. So I passed once a year, I would pass whatever standardized test they would give me. And they were like, see, this kid's fine. They don't need any accommodations. And I guess by third grade and on, I started to camouflage just enough, like make just enough eye contact, speak
Mhm.
just enough, because I can only imagine, because again, memory is like not quite there for that time, but I got to imagine that I was like, okay, people seem to make a big deal about whatever this is every school year of my life. So, like, how can I fly under the radar at this point? Also, throughout all of like K through 12, I was regularly experiencing sensory distress.
Yeah.
Migraines were a regular part of my experience. I would be fine at home where I had control over my sensory environment for the most
Mhm.
part. But going to school with like the bright lights and sounds, smells, all of it, just frequent migraines, frequent nausea, frequent throwing up, and trying to miss school because physically I was just being so drained all of the time. And
Mhm.
doctors would just tell my parents, like, well, we can't find anything wrong, like structurally or whatever. So
Mhm.
we think this kid just doesn't want to go to school and they're just like acting out. They're making up all of these symptoms or they're making themselves throw up, whatever. Right, they're saying they have a headache, but maybe they don't. um, because they're just, kids don't want to go to school and that's all this is, so don't worry about it. So yeah, I was very confused and on a, like a nervous system and body level, very chronically ill. And there was no understanding or supports around that. I was at 14 diagnosed with Erling syndrome, which I'm not, anytime I bring it up, like people haven't heard about it. So I'm not sure if it's come up before.
No.
Mhm.
So the way it was explained to me is Erling syndrome is a visual processing disorder. Disorder. Uh, I wonder. I haven't looked into it enough in like recent years, but I wonder if it's just like a way of speaking to a particular sensory trait that is common amongst autistics or neurodivergent people, but is its own separate thing so that we don't have to also like say that someone's autistic. I don't know. I haven't looked into it enough, but at least for now, what I will say is I wasn't diagnosed autistic. I was diagnosed with this thing called Erling syndrome, which is described as a visual processing disorder that is often confused with dyslexia, but is actually a bit different. And so exposure to bright lighting tends to lead to migraines for me, as well as if I'm trying to read like a book under bright enough lights, like even like outside on a sunny day, I can't look at a book. If I do, the words are moving around on the page, or like there's
Mhm.
this kind of like waterfall visual thing that happens where they kind of like separate out from each other. So just the words move in a way that my brain, if I were to lock into it, would hurt me and result in a migraine if I tried doing that for too long. So I have to be mindful about my exposure to visual inputs, basically,
Mhm. Mhm.
based on that. Apparently, the person who diagnosed me with Erling syndrome mentioned to my mom that she thought I was also likely autistic. My mom says she passed that information on to me, and I was really resistant to the idea of being autistic. I have no memory of that conversation happening at all. It may very well have happened. Again, I really don't remember enough about my childhood or adolescence even, so who's to say? Um, but I think at that
Yeah.
point, I'm sure I had internalized all kinds of ableist ideas about all kinds of
Mhm.
stuff. So it wouldn't surprise me if I had been like, what are you talking about? Or something. So that it was doing all the research, experiencing burnout, and then talking with my parents and getting more information from them about like, what did you notice? And boy, there was a lot of information they had that I did not have access to. So
Mhm.
that really confirmed everything for me. And that's my autism story.
Wow.
That is a journey.
That is a journey. And there's so many things that I resonated with as you were talking. And just really briefly, because I want to know more about your coaching journey, but when you talked about having that sensory overwhelm from K to 12, it's so interesting because I had stomach distress all the time. Anytime that there was like a special day going to be happening, I was sick and I couldn't go. And, I'd have to come home and I would need to like be in a dark room. You know, oh my God. I wasn't really involved in a lot of extracurriculars because I was like, by the time school was done, I was done. And I couldn't understand why some people and how like possibly like, oh, we're going out and or we have a part-time job and we are also playing sports and we're doing like a million things. I'm like, aren't you guys really tired after being at school all day? Like that in my head, I wasn't actually brave enough to say it, but just the way you put it into words, like about sensory overwhelm, I don't think I knew that's what I was experiencing until much, 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 much later. And this idea that like no one can find anything wrong. Like we don't know why she's always in stomach distress and like why she feels so anxious. We don't know why her periods are so horrible. We don't know why. Like she's fine. She's smart. She's handling it. She's doing it. But nobody looks at the cost of doing it. And I think that's really, really hard. And like the word autism would never have been mentioned back when I was a kid because there was such a very narrowly defined idea of autism. And no, that really resonated with me, what you said. The exposure to visual stimulation being so hard. And also your use of the word fine. I underlined it, right? Like they're fine. If they can pass the standardized test, they're fine. And I had this flashback of something that happened to me. I think I was in grade 7, and we had to do this short story creative writing assignment. And I got my paper back, and there was no grade, there was no mark, there was no comment other than the word fine. And I almost had, well, I did have a meltdown. I lost it. Like I had worked so hard on that, and I couldn't understand like why somebody would put that on my paper. And so, like, my mom, God bless her, she's like, I'll go talk to your teacher. I'll just ask, like, what's going on. And the teacher, she said to my mother, well, everyone else was having such a hard time with it. I finally got to your daughters, and, I was just like, oh, this is fine, like, as in good. But to this day, I hate the word fine because it's like we're just barely surviving and making it. But hey, you're fine. And it's like, can we go from surviving barely to maybe thriving at some point? Can we maybe talk about that? Like what conditions would allow us to thrive? So thank you for your journey and your story because yeah, help me remember a few things.
Yeah, also chiming in, team has a stomach ache because has issues at school. Like, definitely also mine tended to be very social, like, I had running conflicts with one teacher, and, like, so I get a stomach ache right before her class every time, and, like, my teachers were like, "Well, clearly something psychosomatic's going on, so, like, you need to get over it. Like, we're not denying your experience, you clearly have a stomach ache, but also, like, this is your emotional minefield to navigate, like, figure it out."
I'm sure no co-regulation was offered, no support, no.
They gave me a small room to drink a cup of tea in. They did let me basically skip class and go be in a room, but then I very quickly read the, 3 worthy books that were in there, and then they wouldn't bring me anymore because that was supposed to be a place for me to take a break, not to run away and read. But and then later, high school, it was come home, cry for an hour. That's just how coming home from high school went. It's like, well, but now I need to cry for an hour just from overstimulation, not because anyone was mean to me, but just sheer overstimulation and not wanting to go back again tomorrow. Oh, so I have to cry again in the morning because I don't want to go. So
Hmm. And like not wanting to talk to anybody for a while and needing to be alone. And I still remember to this day, I would go find my mother around like midnight when I was in high school because that would be the time that I was ready to talk. And she's like, "Why?" I'm like, maybe because it took me that long to recover from the day and I was finally ready to share. So can I ask you, Dan, like once you put all those pieces together after you're talking to your parents and kind of whatever you could remember plus all of your research and your clients, you put that all together, you realized you're autistic, and then what was your next steps? Like what did you do with that? How long between that and deciding to become a coach?
Yeah. So at that point in the journey, I had gotten to a point of capacity that I was ready to, well, as ready as I was going to be to return to work. Um, it had gone long enough of crashing with friends and family, and was like, okay, I have bills to pay, and I gotta start making ends meet in that way. So then I was like, okay, well, what am I gonna do? How am I gonna make money to survive? And I had the formal training and student debt of going to grad school to become a therapist. So I was like, okay, let's revisit that
Hmm.
as a starting point. And I was in the middle of accruing my hours as an LPC. I was technically an LPC intern in Oregon. That's how you start out before you get the number of direct client hours and supervision hours to become full LPC status. I was in the middle of that in Oregon, but then, took time off and moved back to another state. So I restarted the process in Texas and found a supervisor who was this incredible trans mentor of mine. And my focus as a therapist getting back into that work was okay, so I have the same objective of wanting to provide care to trans and queer community as someone with lived experience in those communities. And I want to add on to that autism and ADHD. I will say the ADHD piece for myself came later. It was way easier for me to recognize autism in myself than ADHD because a lot
Yeah.
of the systems and routines that I built to support my autistic traits were very much obscuring my ADHD traits and didn't figure that out till later, as again, some of us experience. So I was like, okay, so trans, queer, ADHD community, let's go. That was my mission of the client base I was trying to serve. Got successful with that. I will say when I was doing this work as a therapist in Texas, it was very easy to find clients
Mm.
because it was, turns out, very niche what I was offering. And in the state, there were like maybe, if I'm being generous, like 5 to 10 people max in the
Yeah.
whole state of Texas who were specializing in that niche as well. I wouldn't say a full 10 even, but anyway, it was few. And so I was doing well enough as a therapist, feeling good enough about the work I was doing with my trans queer ADHD clients. And I was also very aware of what was happening regarding the attacks on trans rights in
Yeah.
particular, what that looked like specifically in Texas, but also like beyond.
Yeah.
Just being in Texas at that time and my clients being there is like really focused on, okay, what is the state of anti-trans attacks? And I think it was maybe 2023 or so when the gender affirming care ban for trans youth went into effect. I had attended different advocacy events leading up to that passing with TENT. That stands for the Transgender Education Network of Texas. They're an incredible organization, amazing resource for people in Texas. There was a lot of work that they did to try and prevent these kinds of policies from going through. A lot of trans people showing up to the Capitol day after day, speaking against it. And yet it went through. And so in that moment of 2023, when it was official and the Texas Children's Hospital was officially closing its clinic for gender affirming care for youth, I was like, okay, so they are coming for medical care for gender expansive youth right now. And having read a lot about the history of transness and gender nonconformity over time, I recognize that, okay, this is a starting point, right? This is the testing
Right.
ground
Right.
Yeah.
for all the degree of anti-trans legislation that they want to come into being. And so if this has gone into effect in Texas, I had also seen that similar policies were occurring in other coastal states, that it was only a matter of time before it extends to gender expansive adults
Mhm.
and all of us, really. So there's what that looked like in Texas and my thoughts on what that could mean moving forward, really trying to imagine a long game with this and checking in with my fellow trans queer community, my mentors, people who've been doing similar enough work longer than I have of, hey, what do you think I should be doing when it comes to flowing with the times that we're in while also preparing for the potential future and simultaneously orienting towards hopeful times.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I've,
Yeah.
yeah, and I've gotten incredible support and feedback from fellow trans queer community on that topic. So where it led me was, okay, if they're coming after healthcare for gender expansive, gender nonconforming people, it's only a matter of time before they attack mental health care as well. And so I was thinking about, what does the longevity of being licensed in a state like Texas look like for me as a trans queer ADHD individual who serves community of those experiences as well, I did not feel that it was something I could count on always
Yeah.
being accessible to me, as well as having evolving thoughts around the mental health industrial complex itself, the reliance on systems like insurance, and how these systems and institutions often not just fail people, but have the potential to cause great harm as well, especially to people of more marginalized experiences. Over time, I have felt more and more conflicted about working as a licensed therapist, given its ties to the complex and carceral systems and fear around, well, what if I'm licensed in a state like Texas that were to someday implement a policy around you're no longer able to offer gender affirming care, but now the we're saying the evidence based treatment for being gender expansive or queer is conversion therapy. What do I do then? So given my conflict with a lot of those systems and what that looks like at the moment in Texas specifically, I made the decision to move back to the Pacific Northwest, get out of Texas. It was also, side note, it was also hard for me to be in like out in the world in person with fellow trans and queer community in that there was so much overlap with my client base that I was still trying, and with during the quarantine phase of the COVID pandemic, was not used to be around people in person anymore. And I was like, okay, how do I navigate this? Also, the way that you, at least my experience, the way I was taught as a therapist in grad school was essentially that you need to be like completely separate from your client base. They really didn't prepare you for, well, what if the communities that I'm serving are also communities that I belong to? How do I navigate that?
Right.
There
Oof.
was there was no talk of that. Which again, when I think about their spiel on social justice orientation, I'm like, I mean, but in practice, I don't remember really receiving any of that. Anyway, so point is, I was rather isolated in the place I was at in Texas and struggling to access community there at the time while still like trying to navigate, okay, like the ethics of the intersection, as well as being worried about the onslaught of anti-trans policies happening in the state of Texas that I was in, and the mental health industrial complex, and having a lot of distrust in regards to the Texas State Board. We could talk more about that in a future episode, but at least for now, I would just say I was at odds with so much of it. I made the decision to move back to the Pacific Northwest, and I now am licensed fully in the state of Oregon. I have since retired my Texas license. Shortly after I retired my Texas license, there was this whole thing around the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, saying that providing gender affirming health care was against the law, given the, at least for youth, given the gender affirming care ban that went into effect. I was worried when that ban first went through. I was like, it's written in a vague enough way that I could see someone trying to apply this to mental health care as well, essentially affirming the gender identity of a gender expansive youth being part of that ban, depending on how somebody wanted to play that card. So here we are. I've retired the license, and just a month or so after that decision was finalized, the Attorney General is speaking to essentially wanting to enforce reintegration therapy as the treatment for gender nonconformity, which that is just a creative word to describe conversion therapy. So the Texas board released a follow-up statement because, like, he was speaking as the Attorney General, not the Texas board. The Texas board later put out an official statement speaking to it. It was still kind of vague. It was saying, so technically you still can provide affirming care to gender expansive youth and adults. Also, it is softly encouraged to use reintegration therapy as the treatment framework, but there was nothing official in that statement speaking to a true ban. So while that is a relief to know that the ban does not officially extend to mental health care for trans youth, there's a part of me that is still bracing for feels like a matter of time until they do
Yeah.
expand policies of that nature. And again, what do I do if I'm licensed in a state where policies like that do come into concrete effect, and that being completely at odds with who I am and my values and the safety of the communities that I serve? So all of that factors into why I retired the Texas license. I have the Oregon license. I'm do less therapy work. I'm more focused on ADHD peer support coaching and soon to be gender doula support as well. So one of the things that I really appreciate about being an ADHD peer support coach is that I am not limited by these licensure boards and governing bodies in the ways that I was as a therapist. Now, I fully understand the perspective of, okay, well, if it's not regulated in these same ways, then how are we navigating accountability? Because people can absolutely still cause harm
Sure.
in this
Yeah.
field. I would add that licensed professionals often cause harm in their respective fields as well. So
Right.
the systems that are in place don't necessarily in a genuine sense hold people all that accountable. I feel I believe in accountability. I am interested in in ongoing conversations where we are figuring that out as peer support coaches. Also, when it comes to living under rising fascism and authoritarianism, it doesn't it, there's not enough space, there's not enough expansion to operate under the licensure systems, at least that I become familiar with for the foreseeable future, especially as I continue to see all of these institutions capitulating and failing our communities. So that ran out of steam on those thoughts, but I hope that was explaining how I got to this point.
I think you did very well explaining so many of the different things that were along your path and how you got here today. Fascinating. I just beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a crappy context, but a very cool journey, right? Like the landscape you're navigating is I could do with the better landscape, but it's still a really cool story and I'm glad that you found your way to peer support coaching cuz yeah, sometimes the Wild West is like a good place to be, literally and metaphorically. It's full of potholes and weirdness too, but yeah, sometimes being a little more innovative and flexible is it's the creative thing to do. I'm a big fan of being creatively autistic. So, yeah, peer support gives us that space.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of exactly what you said. When you work with somebody, you want them to have at least some of your own lived experience. And the fact that so many autistic people are gender nonconforming or members of the LGBTQ plus community. I mean, there's so many people who are going to be listening and either see themselves in you or, maybe somebody they love. And I think it's just an amazing thing. The more voices we add, the more lived experiences are going to be reflected in this collective. And I think that's really, really important. And something else you said that is really sparking some ideas in my brain for a future episode. And I'm sorry, Rady, if we've already talked about this once upon a time, you can tell me. But even if we have, I think it's something that we might want to come back to, is this idea about actually having an episode on what goes on in a coaching session. What are the benefits that you might experience from a coaching session? What are some of the questions to ask before you say yes to a particular coach? Right? What are things to be looking for in a coach? Because, it's not a regulated industry at the moment. What are the green flags? What are the red flags? And I think if we gave people a bit more insight into us, the coaching context and what sort of issues we work on during sessions. And maybe now that you're here, we can talk about how it differs from therapy and really just, I think, maybe putting people a bit more at ease to understanding what coaching is and what it isn't, and just really knowing what to look for in a healthy coaching relationship. I think that might be a really fun couple of episodes.
Yeah, I don't think we've talked about that yet. I think we just kind of take that for granted as definitional to what we're doing here. It might actually be worth taking that assumption and unpacking it and talking about it. I'll put that on the list that I definitely keep updated and isn't collecting dust in the back end of my Google Drive.
Mine is written in hard copy. It's on paper.
Awesome, Dan. Thank you so much for sharing your story and joining our collective peer support experiment out here in the Wild West. Really glad to have you here and glad to hear your story. And yeah, is there anything else you want to share before I wrap us up and take us out of here?
I mean, just again, very happy to be here in the space with you both and to be part of the cohort, the collective. Amazing. I'm very excited about the work that each of us is doing. And recently, having met some of the like newest cohort people, I'm just so excited about what's going to be coming in the future. And I mean, as for everything else, I imagine there will be more conversations where you can get into the weeds of this or that. I am excited to talk more someday about gender doula work. I will say I'm not quite there yet. Got into the program, starts this fall, will be running for a year. I'm sure I will have a lot to say about it as it is ongoing. But I see it at least as very much connected to the framework behind ADHD peer support coaching in the sense of it's a way of finding tools and resources that exist outside of these formal systems and institutions that can support people in their exploration journeys, right? Whether that's in regards to neurotype or in regards to gender or queer identity,
Oh, yeah.
just finding additional ways of supporting people that isn't tied down by the pathology paradigm and industrial complexes that we are surrounded by.
Well, that sounds very interesting and worth a whole series of episodes in the future as you get into it and study it. So I look forward to bringing that up again in the future. And yeah, otherwise, I think we're done for today. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thank you for listening to Autistic Stuff for Autistic People. As a reminder, we are all peer support coaches within the Autistic Peer Support Coaching Collective, offering a variety of free and paid intentionally autistic spaces. You can learn more and follow us at our website, autisticcoaches.com. You can best support the podcast by sharing this episode with your friends or joining our Patreon to access ad-free episodes. Thank you for listening to Autistic Stuff for Autistic People. New episodes come out on alternating Mondays. Send us your constructive comments and feedback via email at autisticstuffpodcast@gmail.com. Autistic Stuff for Autistic People is a production of Fox and Raven Media. For more podcasts from Fox and Raven Media, visit our website, foxandravenmedia.com.